What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking more about the hurricane season that's going to be coming up soon. Hurricane season for the Atlantic, as I've mentioned earlier and yesterday, starts on June 1st, and we're going to be talking about that as well as the greatest risk areas that I want to pay attention to, and as well as, before we get into that, an area of interest that has been tagged in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. I do briefly want to go over, mainly just to kind of set the tone for what we're potentially looking at, as well as give you an idea of, okay, what exactly are the parameters we're looking at for this hurricane season, and why are they important? So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it right here. So here's the situation that we have in the Eastern Pacific. We have an 80% chance of formation in the next 7 days, and in 48 hours, it's only at 10%. So basically, what you're looking at right here is kind of a low floor, high ceiling type of event where you're kind of looking at this and you're looking at this and you're going, okay, we're already at 80% 7 days out, and we only have 10% in the next 48 hours. This is more of a high ceiling type of threat because looking at this right now, it's looking more like a long-term threat than a short-term threat for the most part. And I can go ahead and refresh this as well just to kind of give you the latest as well. This is the latest, as a matter of fact. And here we go. Showers and thunderstorms located several hundred miles south of the coast of southern Mexico remain disorganized. Conditions appear favorable for additional development, and a tropical depression is likely to form in a few days while the system moves generally west-northwestward at about 10 miles per hour. 48 hours is 10, 7 days is 80, so we have a 1080 risk that we have going on right here that we're going to have to pay attention to, more of a long-term threat, but it's kind of what we're kind of showing you with the NHC. When we start seeing areas of interest tagged in the Atlantic, what you're going to want to pay attention to is, okay, what's the 48% risk for 48-hour risk looking like, and what's the 7-day risk looking like? Is it going to be like a 0.20? Is it going to be like a 0.30 or something like that we're going to have to pay attention to? Or is it going to be, when the system starts to evolve, is this going to be more of a long-term threat, like a 1060 or something like that, where it has a higher ceiling of performance? So that's the kind of stuff we're paying attention to going forward right here, and I briefly wanted to cover this, and then we're going to go ahead and actually pivot a little bit. We're going to go ahead and move to the Eastern Pacific a little bit right here, just to kind of give an idea of what the forecast runs are indicating right here. And I also wanted to show you this because this is really a high ceiling type of event. You have the system starting to organize and develop in the next 60 hours, already at tropical storm strength in the next 66 hours, according to the GFS. Then it continues to really strengthen up, tighten up with its pressure gradient. We're down to a 972 millibar hurricane. That's around a Category 2 equivalent right there. And I will go ahead and look at more of the wind speeds and all of that in a little bit, but ultimately then you have it stagnating as it's moving into less favorable conditions, and then it starts to dissipate off the coast of Mexico right there, and we're going to have to pay attention to that. Let's go ahead and show you the European run as well. European only goes about 6 days out, but it gives us another idea of what we're potentially looking at right here. You start seeing the system organizing and developing. While not as strong and not as rapidly developing as the GFS, it still is a strong tropical storm to weak hurricane strength at its peak right there. So it's another one of those high ceiling type of events that we're going to have to pay attention to. Looking at the European AI run as well, just kind of showing that. Not showing that much development, but it does get up to tropical storm strength, which we'll have to pay attention to. The AI run typically isn't particularly that favorable for tropical development in terms of what it uses. The Canadian run, similar situation, organizing and developing in the next 4 days, and then it gets down to near hurricane strength, and then it moves and dissipates and pretty much goes off into the sunset. You're looking at the Icon run as well, similar situation, organizing, developing, gets down to hurricane strength. It actually gets pretty close to what the GFS is forecasting, in fact stronger than the GFS forecast, and that pressure gradient tightens really quickly, I would say, especially in the next 5 days. But ultimately, the worst of it's going to stay out to sea, and then it's going to dissipate. Why am I showing you this? Why are we talking about a storm that's developing in the Eastern Pacific? Well, this is kind of the parameters I'm showing you to look at, and kind of the things we're paying attention to to kind of get a general gist as to what we're looking at. This is kind of a practice run, and for at least for me personally, right here, looking at what we're looking at with the runs, looking at the conditions. Let's go ahead and look at the wind shear. Ultimately, I'm showing you this because I want you guys to be on the watch and be aware of what to look for going forward as the hurricane season peaks up. So here's what we have going on. We have an area of very low wind shear forecasted right here across much of the eastern Pacific. That's really good for hurricane development, and that's why you have that 80% tagged right there from the NHC. As the system organizes and develops, shear does increase considerably, although because of the way and the direction it's going, initially it's going to help the hurricane, because hurricane actually, hold up a second, no, it actually won't. It'll actually hurt it in a way, because what you're looking at is actually, no, it'll actually help it. Excuse me, I apologize. I'm a little flustered right now. The reason I say it's going to help it is because this wind shear is going the same direction as the outflow boundary, and if the outflow gets caught into that wind shear, it's going to help tighten the pressure gradient and allow for the hurricane to breathe a bit more and allow it for it to develop and tighten up even faster. That's relatively common, and we saw that quite a bit last year with Milton, with Helene, with Beryl even. We saw that outflow boundary just get dragged into it by some wind shear to the north of it and allow for it to get up to a Category 5 intensity right there. So then the shear starts to tear it apart. It moves into cooler sea surface temperatures, waters, and that's pretty much what we're looking at. Speaking of water temps, the water temps where it's going to be expected to develop is over 30 degrees Celsius, which for those of you tuning in from the United States is about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That is quite a lot of warmth and a lot of water to work with. And the OHC over there, I want to go ahead and take a quick gander at the ocean heat content. Here's what we have going on for OHC. I'm sorry this is a little bit blurry right now. This is the best resolution I could get for you right now. But where this area is right now, it's sitting over an area of about 125 OHC. 125 ocean heat content. That is pretty conducive for rapid intensification. That's another factor that you're going to want to look at going forward, and we'll have to pay attention to that as well. So ultimately, that's what we're going for right there in terms of what we're looking at with the Eastern Pacific. Another thing I want to take a look at is the moisture content, the dry air, the relative humidity. What's it going to be like over there? Dry air, there's really not that much that's going to stop the system from organizing and developing right there. We're looking at a pretty good moisture pocket, and it's going to really tighten up quite a bit. However, there is the possibility that some dry air does get caught into the hurricane, and dry air intrusion does start to choke the storm out a bit more, and that ultimately is what's going to kind of start the weakening phase, along with cooler sea surface temperatures as it moves into like areas like 28, 26, 24 degrees Celsius, as it moves closer to Mexico over there. But ultimately, that's the kind of situation that we're looking at right here in the Eastern Pacific. Now, why do I bring this up once again? Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is to kind of show you the parameters we're going to be watching for hurricane season, and then tie into, okay, what's the greatest risk what we're going to see from the Atlantic with those parameters that you just mentioned. Well, here's what we've been paying attention to, and we talked about this quite a bit on stream last night. Based on some of the climate models we've been looking at, it looks like there's going to be a pretty strong ridgings pattern blocking much of at least in terms of the climatological runs, and we'll go ahead and show you those. Here's what we're looking at right here. This is for June 2025. You're seeing higher than average 500 millibar height anomalies, which means more ridging, and it means there's a good chance of higher pressure expected for much of these regions right here, particularly over here in Europe and again in Canada and parts of the United States. What that's going to do is it's going to drive more hurricanes further to the south, and that's going to put more areas in the Caribbean and the Gulf and Central America in the line of fire. Going into July, you're seeing a broader 500 millibar height anomalies. That's more ridging and all of that you're typically seeing right there. Ultimately, that's kind of how the Azores high starts to ramp up, and then you starts to see a couple of areas in August that start to weaken with troughing, but you do start seeing that ridging pattern start to ramp back up in September, according to the CFS runs that we're seeing right here. So that's ultimately going to help drive more hurricanes and drive more tropical systems towards land, and that's something we absolutely do not want. Going into October, where there's more U.S. landfalling hurricanes, typically you're seeing that pretty strong ridging pattern that's going to help drive more systems towards the United States, and we're going to have to pay very close attention to that going forward. Another area I do want to take a look at is kind of the main sea level pressure anomalies as well, to kind of see what we're potentially looking at. Here's what we're seeing for June. Lower than average across much of the western Atlantic Ocean, higher than average across much of the eastern, as well as in the Azores high and all of that. Here's kind of just a quick tidbit about why I'm talking about this. Lower pressure means more thunderstorms. Higher pressure means less thunderstorms. That's pretty simple. And the higher your pressure is, the less likely you have for convection. The lower your pressure is, the more likely you have for convection. So ultimately, the anomalies for June, we're going to look at a pretty strong Azores high, particularly as you get closer to the British Isles over here. And that's ultimately not going to impact much hurricane development over here. But what it is going to do is it's going to affect the placement of the Azores high. The Azores high is forecasted to be stronger than average according to the CFS. I want to see if other runs can pick it up. I'm going to see if the CANSIPS can pick it up. CANSIPS is actually the opposite, as a matter of fact, predicting a below average Azores high, which will affect the steering currents in the opposite direction. And MME does not have that, unfortunately, but ultimately, why am I talking about this? Well, the Azores high is a steering current, like I just mentioned, and ultimately that's what's going to allow hurricanes to get driven into the Caribbean, because high pressure systems, their flow is clockwise or anticyclonic. So their clockwise flow, basically, you start at 12 o'clock over here, then you move to 3 o'clock, and then you move to 6 o'clock, and then you start moving towards 9 o'clock, which puts a lot of these areas in a line of fire. I think you guys see where I'm going with this. Low pressure is counterclockwise, generally. So I hope that explains some things right there going forward, and I hope that does clear some ambiguity with that. High pressure, you're seeing clockwise flow. That's going to be driving the steering currents and potentially more tropical cyclones into the Caribbean and the United States. While you see these low pressure areas right here, likely you're going to see some more convection for the month of June. Going into July, things get a bit more interesting. Higher pressure than average across much of the Atlantic basin. Going into August and September, you're starting to see lower pressure than average as hurricane season ramps up, and that's pretty much what we're seeing with that. Looking at the CANSIPS run from May 1st, generally what you're noticing here, you're seeing some weaker steering currents according to the Azores high, according to this run right here. I want to see what the June runs typically look like, but look at October, ladies and gentlemen. You are seeing a lot higher pressure across much of the region over here. Yeah, that's going to drive more tropical cyclones towards land, ladies and gentlemen. With a pressure that high, that's absolutely going to do that, particularly towards the end of hurricane season. So ultimately, that's what we're paying attention to with these runs right here and these climate runs going forward. So ultimately, now this poses the question, where do I think is the greatest risk and why is that? Where I think is going to be the greatest risk based on all the parameters I've shown, as well as some of the CANSIPS runs. I have the CANSIPS water vapor for you guys as well. Accumulated precip right here, that kind of helps increase the moisture. Ultimately, what I'm thinking is, first of all, compared to last year, we're also going to be seeing less Sahara dust compared to what we were seeing previously based on these climate runs, because the Sahel is a bit more active. The Sahel region is going to be a bit more active. The monsoon season is going to be stronger, and that's ultimately going to keep some of that Sahara dust in Africa and away from the Atlantic Ocean. You're still going to see outbreaks of Sahara dust in June, July, early August, all of that stuff. Don't get me wrong, but what you're also going to notice too is you're going to see them at a lower intensity, I would say. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and show you what we're looking at for the next 2 weeks according to the GFS right here, and I can kind of get it started. Here's the 700 relative humidities. I actually want to see if I can get the anomalies Going right here. Okay, perfect. Right here. So here's what we're seeing right here. These are the moisture anomalies right here. Wetter than average, drier than average. That's what we're typically seeing right now across much of Morocco and Algeria and those areas right there. You're seeing more moisture than average. And yes, you do see some Sahara dust moving into the region. I can go ahead and show you the relative humidity to kind of give you a glimpse of that. You do have that Sahara dust moving into parts of the main development region in much of the Atlantic Ocean right here. But compared to what we're seeing on average, it's at least in the northern and southern part of the MDR, it's actually less than average. And as you continue to move forward, that moisture gradient, that moisture anomaly expands to much of the main development region, where you're seeing a more moist than average main development region right there, and that's going to be causing some problems in the long run. And then you start seeing that Sahara dust get cut off for a little bit, and off we go. I would say. Now, granted, there's not going to be hurricanes forming right off the bat as soon as June 1st starts. It takes time. It's going to take a few weeks for things to get organized and develop, but we're going to have to pay attention to it going forward. And ultimately, that's why the Lesser Antilles, the Greater Antilles, and other areas in the Caribbean are my pick for the greatest risk in terms of that, because you have the steering currents that are going to be stronger than average. You have warm sea surface temperatures. Obviously, you don't have as much wind shear as you're looking at a negative neutral phase, and the dry air from the Sahara air layer and the Sahara dust is going to be less than what we were seeing last year at this current point, and that's going to drive up some more potential, and that's going to be rise up. It's going to cause a greater risk for a lot of these areas in the Caribbean Sea, and we're going to have to pay attention to that. And ultimately, that's where I would say is the greatest risk. I would even say starting in late June is when you need to pay attention if you're in the Caribbean, because that's typically when tropical cyclones start to organize and develop. That's when you have that early boost of tropical development. We've seen it over the last 10 years. We usually get a couple, 2 to 3, maybe even 4 storms in June. We saw Alberto. We saw last year. We saw Beryl, which barreled through the Caribbean, and then we saw Chris right after that happen. So ultimately, you're gonna see stuff like that, in my opinion. Starting around late June, that's when I would say development's going to start ramping up. Then things might quiet down a little bit in July. And then in August, we go boom, 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 based on the climatological runs that we are seeing right here, and we're going to have to pay close attention to it. But if you're in the Caribbean, you're going to want to take this very, very seriously. This is looking like a pretty big threat for you again this year, and we'll have to see what happens, but that's my greatest area of risk. In terms of the greatest area of risk in the United States, based on those same projections I was showing you, I'm going to have to go with the Gulf Coast of the United States. I was talking about it on stream last night, mainly because those higher pressures areas, as well as those higher heights at the 500 millibars, are going to drive those hurricanes and those tropical cyclones further into the Gulf of Mexico, and that's going to put a lot of those Gulf Coast states in the line of fire. So someone was commenting about New Orleans. New Orleans, you're going to want to watch this hurricane season. Houston, you're going to want to watch this hurricane season. Hell, everywhere from Texas all the way down to southern Florida on that Gulf coastline needs to watch what's going to be happening this hurricane season. In terms of the East Coast and all that stuff, I do think you're going to have a lesser risk than what you typically get, and mainly because of those strong steering currents keeping hurricanes mainly in the Caribbean, mainly in the Gulf Coast. But you could see stuff from the backside of it, where after these tropical cyclones do make landfall, you could see stuff like at tropical storm strength and all that as it's moving inland and all of that. So that is also a possibility. Another area I would think would see maybe a little bit less risk too is Central America, but we'll have to see what happens. I do think Central America is still at a pretty big risk for tropical stuff to end up making landfall over there, but it depends on the steering currents and how strong they get, particularly in June and July, so we'll have to pay attention to that. Now, in terms of like the northeastern seaboard and all of that stuff, I'm not too worried about that. What's the point of all of this? Well, there's 2 things I do want to highlight before I close out the video. Number one, there are less fail-safes than last year from the climatological runs and from the observations I am seeing. Part of the reason 2024 did not perform the way it was supposed to was because you had more Sahara dust than expected, and it lingered for longer than we initially thought it would. This year, we're not going to probably see that as much. Now, I could eat my own words for that, but that's one of the reasons. The second one is you're moving more into a negative neutral phase, and that's going to weaken the trade winds and allow for more tropical cyclones to organize and develop. And we'll continue to update you on that, as well as everything else here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. And if you want to ask us questions or come hang out with us, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.